We're going to be continuing our core values study that we've entitled Under the Hood, and continuing to learn some of the non-negotiables, some of the uncompromising stances we take as a church, kind of the really what makes Ashland tick, and helping us understand what we believe. And I hope that it has been beneficial to you. And again, as we go through these things, I certainly would ask those of you that attend or consider this your church home, that you commit to these as well, not just on a church level, but taking a little bit deeper, getting into your personal life, and really considering some of these topics. And so, we're trying to get beyond the paint jobs and all the prettiness of the car, and really trying to see what makes this thing run. And so, this morning we have the opportunity to study this idea of living life on mission, missional living, however you want to rephrase it, but really talking about how we live. What do we dedicate ourselves to, how we spend our time. So I'm going to ask this real quick, and it's okay. It's going to require some back and forth real quick, but that's all right. If somebody was to ask you, which I am, what makes life meaningful? What would your answer be? What gives your life meaning? Somebody tell me. Come on, spit it out. Family. Good answer. What else? What makes life meaningful to you? Who said that? Oh, my dad say that? Okay, grandkids. I didn't know that was who said that, but that's important. What else? God makes your life meaningful, valuable. What else? Relationships in general, good. The people around you and those you get to call family and friends, for sure. Anything else? What gives your life meaning? Brand new babies, yes, absolutely. And I heard love, just in general, a lot of times expressed through relationships. Good answer. Anything else? What makes life meaningful? Good answers. Knowing God's in control. Yeah, good. Anything else? I don't want to cut you off. Some of you really, I can tell you've got one. We're in church. You can't spit it out in church, right? Anything else? Who said that? Did you say money? And for some of us, like, yeah, I could use a little bit more of it, right? And some of us are really consider that. But certainly, money can have some weight and meaning to our lives. So I did a little research, just so you know, and you covered a lot of the answers that were already given. But Pew Research gave a survey, or issued a survey, and they had a lot of returned answers. I'm not going to read all of them to you because there were 16, but I want to highlight some of them to you. Here's what they look like. We're going to start from the top and work our way down. They're on the screen in front of you. Family and children, number one. And I think we would agree that somebody said relationships. I think Tony said family. Definitely, our family provides a lot of value. You spend the most time with them. It gives meaning. It gives importance to the way that we spend our day. And definitely, family and children have a lot of persuasion over what it is that we do and how we invest our time and our resources. So, what makes life meaningful? Number one on the list, family and children. Number two, occupation and career. For some people, there is an unattachable connection between who I am and my identity and what I do. And guys, probably, we talked about this a Wednesday night or two ago, probably we struggle with this quite a bit. Who I am is totally wrapped up in what I do because, again, we spend a lot of time doing what we do. So it really becomes part of who I am and part of my identity, good, bad, or indifferent. Number three, somebody mentioned money. We can put that under here, material well-being. Having stuff. Some people want to be defined by what they have. Number four, friends and community. Again, building off of that relational aspect. My friends and community give me meaning, give me purpose. For some, they live for physical and mental health. They're constantly absorbed by and learning ways that I can be physically healthy, where I can maintain my mental health, albeit important for sure. Now, I skipped 6 and 7, not because they weren't important, but again, I didn't want to spend forever on this. But number 8, I'm surprised nobody said this, my hobbies and my recreation. And again, listen, nothing wrong with hobbies. Please don't ever think, I gotta work and there's never allowed to be downtime. That's not true. For most of us, if we don't have a hobby or a recreation or some type of outlet, we'd go crazy. I gotta have that time away. I need to have that downtime. And then the very last one, I cannot believe, you even put it on the screen. I cannot believe this was number 16 on the list. And some of you are going to be very disheartened by this answer because a lot of us in this room, we have this at home and it gives us more meaning than maybe we care to admit. But the number 16 answer on the list is what? Our pets give us meaning. Now, how many of you, just curious, how many of you have the fur baby at home? Okay, a lot of us do, and a lot of us look forward. It's crazy because you go home and those things are excited to see you. We've got two. I've got an older dog. Her name's Gracie. I don't know what she is, but she's like a little thing. And she's a little older now. She doesn't get as excited. So she just stands there when I walk in the door and looks up at me and barks. Just incessantly until I pick her up. But then we've got Buddy. And Buddy's the psycho. He's the crazy one. And that dog is about the same size as she is, but when I walk in the door, he's jumping up to my waist, if not higher, all the time. So I walk in and you've got noise and you've got attention. And to be honest with you, sometimes when you walk in after a day, you ever have a day, and you see them, man, your hope in humanity and life is restored when you see these things. And certainly, I think God gave us the ability to have pets because it does. It assists in our purpose and meaning. Sometimes it's just almost therapeutic to come in and see these things. Now, if you don't have fur babies, you're thinking we're crazy. These people are nuts. Listen, you ever walk the halls of an airport anymore? You have to think that some people are crazy. The number of animals that travel, not service animals, nothing like that, just their little dog, their little fluff ball that they cannot leave at home. It's crazy now because they bring meaning. Now, whatever the answer is for you, what ends up happening is when we determine that answer, when I figure out in my mind what makes life meaningful to me, in turn what happens is we make it our personal mission to find meaning in our lives through those responses. So when you look at those that are on the screen in front of you, I think that we can identify ways that we really double down on those answers, where we really pour ourselves into whatever category we identify with because it gives us meaning and it gives us purpose and it gives us value. But here's the thing. The meaning and purpose of our life extends beyond just the answers on the screen. There's something that's a little bit deeper than that. Do you realize this morning that there is no greater joy in life than to see God work through you? Do you realize this morning that there is a purpose behind your creation, and that is that you and I exist to partner with God for a purpose that involves these answers, but are not necessarily just those answers. God created us purposefully. He created us with a mission and an identity and a reason for existence. So sure, this morning, definitely thankful for families, definitely thankful for our careers, thankful for all the other things that we do. But you need to know this morning that where God has placed you, wherever that may be, in whatever family that you get to call your family, wherever you call this place your job, whatever neighborhood you find yourself, whatever friend group you have, God has placed you in those positions by divine design. That is not by accident. That is part of our opportunity to find meaning and to fulfill our God-given purpose. Do you remember what Psalm 37 reminds us? The steps of a good man or a woman are ordered by the Lord. Your life circumstances, your sphere of influence, whatever you want to call it, that's not by accident at all. That is by the design of a holy God, because God intends to see you bloom where you are planted. So you're asking yourself, maybe, what does that look like? How? How do I live missionally? If this is going to be a core value, what does this mean? Well, here it is. You ready? In the life of a Christian and the life of our church here at Ashland, the core value of missional living is this. There's the definition in front of you. Snap a picture of it, jot it down real quick, because I really want us to understand what this is. It is the intentional and immediate living out of and sharing of our faith with others where God has placed you. Now, I wish we had time to break that down, and we don't, but when you look at the really strategic usage of those words, it's extremely important that we grab this. Intentional, immediate living out and sharing of your faith with others where God has placed you right now. That's what we would call missional living. So, did you realize this morning that even Jesus lived on purpose with a mission in mind? Do you remember what Jesus' mission was? If he had to state it in a very succinct sentence, do you know what Jesus' mission in this life was? We find it in Luke chapter 19, verse 10. That the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. He wasn't just down here building relationships for no purpose. He was thinking eternally. He was here sent with a purpose, and that was to seek and to save that which was lost. I'm going to go out on a very, very thin limb and say this. If Jesus lived with mission in mind, with purpose in mind, shouldn't we? Should we not live with some intentionality? Should we not live with some sense of urgency that if God has created me for something bigger than my family, something bigger than my career, something bigger than my possessions, whatever answer that gives us meaning, could it be that while those things are extremely important, what if I told you this morning that God has something even more important for you? If that was true about Jesus, then certainly it's probably true about us. Which brings us now to Acts chapter 14. Now, I want you to see this as we work through it because I want to share with you just 4 principles, just 4 thoughts this morning of what missional living might all be about. You can kind of create a checklist if you want, and if there's something maybe that I need to become a little more immediate and intentional, then let's do it. Let's make those changes. So look at Acts chapter 14. We'll start in verse number 1. And it came to pass in Iconium that they went both together into the synagogue, now both being Paul and Barnabas. So they went both together in the synagogue of the Jews, and so spake that a great multitude both of the Jews and also of the Greeks believed. But, now that's a big transitional word in verse number 2. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles, and they made their minds evil, affected against the brethren. Long time, therefore, abode they speaking boldly in the Lord, which gave testimony unto the word of his grace and granted signs and wonders to be done by their hands. And so when we see Jesus, he had a mission statement. When we look at Paul and Barnabas, as we're going to do this morning, certainly they were individuals who were living intentionally and immediately for something bigger than themselves. They had a mission. And here it is. Number 1, missional living, it's evangelistic. That's what the heartbeat of Christ was. That was the heartbeat of Paul and Barnabas as well. To seek and to save that which was lost. Now, it was the pattern for Paul and Barnabas that when they moved from city to city on these missionary journeys, that they would often find themselves going directly toward the city center. Their philosophy of ministry, if you will, was this idea of we could certainly go to all of the surrounding towns, all of the surrounding, maybe more rural areas, but if we are going to capitalize on our time, the best strategy to employ is to go where there is the most saturation of people, and they would find themselves not just in the city, but man, I can't tell you how many times they would go into the city and they would go straight to the synagogue. Go right to the house of worship, and when they got there, they would teach and engage about the topic of Christ. So in Acts chapter 14, what we've read this morning is that they went straight to the synagogue. They began to preach the gospel. And did you hear about this? Verse number 1, the Bible says, after they preached, a great multitude, both of the Jews and also the Greeks, believed. And we would say, fantastic, success. God was doing something in that city, and they were faithfully living out their mission. They were proclaiming the gospel. But then you have, I told you, that very important transition. Did you catch it? Did you see it? The Jews and the Greeks, they believed. Then you get to verse number 2, and it's like, can it not just be good? You ever have one of those weeks where you're like, can I not just have a string of good days? Does there always have to be a good day? But then let me tell you about Tuesday. Monday, great. Tuesday, not so much. It's kind of the idea here in Acts chapter 14. Gospel was received, people were saved, but verse number 2, what happened? The opposition arises because we know that immediate success will often produce immediate opposition. We might as well know that that's the way that these things work. All right, so Luke tells us in Acts 14 that the Jews who opposed Paul and Barnabas were unbelieving, and the idea there is they literally had the idea there, it was totally unpersuadable. These guys were not going to be affected at all by the message of Paul and Barnabas. They had already written it down. They had already come in with the presupposition that I don't care what these two missionaries have to say. We are there to cause a problem. We are unpersuadable. So the idea there is not that they heard the gospel and they just rejected it. They never gave it a chance. It was never an option on the table at all. They didn't care about what was being shared. So such potential is heartbreaking. But when you think about it, don't you think the verse number 2s is probably why we don't live evangelistically? If we knew every time we shared the gospel, verse number 1 would be true, I'm not going to ask you to respond because it's not appropriate at the moment. How many of us would be more consistent in living evangelistically and intentionally if we knew the end of the story would be verse number 1? And the person I shared the gospel with believed, and the person I shared the gospel with would believe. If we knew that was the end of the story every single time, I wonder if that would drive us a little bit more to intentional evangelism. Maybe. But I think the verse number 2s are the reason why we struggle. Because in our minds, we are thinking, okay, I might share with them Christ. I might engage them in some type of evangelistic conversation, but what if they shoot me down? I'm not sure I can handle that. What if they say no? What if they totally reject what I have to say? So in the face of such opposition, we might expect then Paul and Barnabas just to move on to another city. They are starting to get some kickbacks. People aren't real pleased by what they say. We think, all right, now Paul and Barnabas, time to move on. Your time in Iconium is over. There's other cities that need to hear about Christ. This is the time to do it. But what do they do in verse number 3? So verse number 1, people are saved. Verse number 2, people reject and oppose the message of Paul and Barnabas. So instead of leaving, what happens in verse number 3? The first 2 words are key for us to understand the boldness and the missional living of Paul and Barnabas, and that was long time. It's kind of a weird sentence structure if you really look at it. Long time doesn't seem like it should be the first 2 words in that sentence, but the way it reads, long time therefore abode they, speaking boldly. So instead of packing their bags, hopping on the bus and going down to the next city, they stay put, and their rejection almost fuels the fire of their boldness, and they double down on the gospel in the city of Iconium. We're not going to leave. Because the intention was for them to evangelize, and when the evangelists were attempted to run off, they drop anchor and they continue to engage others with the gospel of Christ. Listen, if we are not people that live on mission, the moment we face opposition, we're done. We're going to quit, we're going to run, we're going to go somewhere else. We are certainly not going to have our boldness enraged or inflamed because of that rejection. It's going to douse it, it's going to squash our boldness. But you know what these guys had? Paul and Barnabas had something maybe we would call today called grit. Man, they were not going to be intimidated by the opposition at hand. They were not going to run away from it. We know that grit is one of those character traits that great men and women all across the board have. Just not going to quit, not going to throw in the towel just because it got a little tough. You ever heard of a guy by the name of John Wesley? Anybody hear John Wesley? Let me tell you about this guy. It was reported that John Wesley encountered the village bully where he was preaching. And one day their carriages came to a head in a very narrow road to the point where neither one could go around, but somebody had to make a decision. Well, the bully knew exactly who Wesley was. Wesley knew exactly who the town bully was. And when they came head to head, Wesley decided to give the man the entire road, even though it required him to ditch his carriage into the side. And so as the bully passed by, he said, "I never turn out for fools," directed towards Wesley. And Wesley, who was 5'2" in stature, mind you, replied, "I always do." You know why? Yeah, I had to wait for a second. It'll click. It'll click. He had grit. He was not going to be put off, literally. He was not going to be intimidated by opposition. He had grit. Christian, can I tell you this morning, you're not living missionally when you're not living evangelistically. It's not possible. So when you get to verse number 4, we've already set the stage for this one, but missional living is evangelistic. Missional living also endures opposition. We've already talked about it, but I want you to see what happens. They stay in Iconium. They continue to boldly preach. Verse number 4. But the multitude of the city was divided. So that rejection of verse number 2 is getting a little bit stronger. So the multitude of the city was divided, part held with the Jews, part with the apostles. And when there was an assault made both of the Gentiles and also of the Jews with their rulers to use them despitefully, and watch this, and to stone them, what happens? They were aware of it, and they fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and unto the region that lieth round about. So, okay, let's put this together in our mind. Let's connect the scenes. They preach, people receive Christ. They preach, people oppose. They face the opposition with boldness. They were not going to be run off. And in their boldness, the divide grew greater to the point where what happened? Their missional living was so intense and so dedicated that it was now becoming close to a life sentence. So now we're thinking, okay, verse number 2, the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles. They made their minds evil affected against the brethren. But in verse number 2, we don't see a direct call for someone's life. At that moment, Paul and Barnabas can double down, namely because nobody's picking up rocks to kill them yet. But by the time you get to this portion of the scripture, the divide had become so great and the opposition had become so strong that Paul and Barnabas realizes and become aware of the fact that these people literally want us to die because of our stance on Christ. The opposition has become so bold that they want to kill us. Well, if you're thinking about this morning along the lines of our core value of missional living, point number 2 is not a great sales tactic. It's not very convincing, is it? Wait, you're telling me that if I live like Paul and Barnabas and that I begin to live missionally, intentionally, and with immediacy, that I'm not going to say our lives might be on the line, but what if it was? I mean, how many of us go, yeah, count me in. Can I go to the Connect Center and sign up for this? Did Jonathan put this on the app? I'm there. Let me sign up to live missionally. If that means I could possibly be stoned to death, sign me up. I doubt that's our attitude. Now listen, a living Paul and Barnabas would have been more fruitful than a passed away Paul and Barnabas. So when they catch wind that the opposition now want to stone them, guess what they do? Okay, it's time for us to go. They move from Iconium, they go to Lystra and Derbe, where guess what happens? They start preaching again. They start doing the same thing. I've got to go to these cities, and they begin to proclaim the gospel there. Look at verse number 7. And they preached the gospel there. We know exactly what they did. They endured the opposition until their lives were on the line. They moved to a neighboring set of cities. Then there they continued the same mission they were living out in Iconium. The mission never changed, but the location did, which brings us to our third thought. When you get to verses 8 through 10, I want you to think about this. Missional living believes that God can still do the miraculous. Do we realize, and I think that we understand this, and I think I'm jumping the notes, but we'll go with it. Do you realize this morning that every time an individual places their faith in Christ, a miracle in that moment takes place? Do you realize this morning that for God to save a soul, that is nothing shy of miraculous? And I don't know about you, but maybe we live in a day where we believe that the only way that we think that God is moving is if, I don't know, maybe we just have awesome programs as a church. Maybe it's just, we got to have this and we got to have that as a church. I don't know about you, but maybe we've grown tired of the idea that maybe God doesn't do the miraculous anymore. I don't know, but do you think that God can still do the miraculous at all? What do you think? Hang on now. I don't know what they call it. That's self-incriminating as you answer that out loud. Because if we believe that God can do the miraculous, why don't we trust him to do the miraculous through us? That's kind of I wish you wouldn't have said amen so quick, because I know you believe that God can do the miraculous, but the question is, in 2025, does he still? Are we living missionally to the point where we are opening up opportunities for God to do the miraculous through us? So look what happens in verse number 8. This is fantastic. You ready? Verse number 8. And there sat a certain man at Lystra, impotent in his feet, being crippled from his mother's womb, who had, how often did he walk in his lifetime? Please see this. Never, ever, ever stood and walked. This individual was born, and from the moment he was born to present day of Acts 14, had never under his own power taken a step in any direction. So what happens? The same heard Paul speak, who steadfastly beholding him and perceiving that he had faith to be healed, Paul, in verse number 10, said with a loud voice, stand upright on thy feet. And he leapt and he walked. Now, there's no record of a synagogue in Lystra. So if you're thinking, I thought they went to the synagogue every time. Well, from what we can tell, Lystra may not have had a synagogue of their own. But instead, Paul and Barnabas took to the streets. I mean, think about it. You show up, and our pattern of ministry is, when I get to the city, I'm going to the synagogue, we're going to have conversations, but this city doesn't have one. Does that mean we get a day off? I mean, how many of us would think, all right, maybe God's just given us a little extended rest. The last experience in Iconium, not great, so where there's no synagogue, maybe I'm all right. Maybe they didn't take that route. They didn't go check in at the hotel and take a nap. The Bible says they went directly to the streets and began to continue living out the mission of evangelism. And while they do, they encounter a man who had never walked before. Paul observes this man, and it wasn't the physical ailment that he noticed, and we don't really know how he gathered this or concluded this in his mind, but Paul notices that this guy who had never walked before had the faith necessary to be healed. So what does Paul say? We don't know his name, but he looks directly at him, and he says two things. Stand upright on thy feet. So get up and put your weight on your feet. Do it. And what happened? The conclusion that Paul had drawn in his mind that he had the faith to be healed was evidenced when the man did exactly as he was told. But he did not just stand up. What does the Bible say this guy did? His first actions on his feet was to do two things. He walked, he took some steps, makes sense, but after that, this guy's jumping all over the place. Why was he doing that? Tell me real quick. I mean, is that not obvious? This dude is thrilled that he is now able to walk, and in rejoicing and in excitement, he's skipping all over the place. Could you imagine being in the crowd as they're watching this take place? Could you imagine what would happen if they realized, I guarantee you, that those that were sitting there watching this take place, those in the crowd knew exactly who this guy was. They might have flipped him a quarter as they walked by. They might have brought him a sandwich as they walked by because he couldn't provide those things on his own. He was probably a beggar. He couldn't work. He couldn't earn those things for himself. And perhaps society had supported him. And now they're watching the same guy who just a week ago I gave him a couple bucks out of pity. And now he's jumping up and down. Why? Because God had done the miraculous in his life. A miracle had taken place. But the problem is that is a great story for Acts 14, but not so great for 2025. Because I wonder if we believe, well, God doesn't do that no more. God doesn't work like that. God doesn't do the miraculous like he did. Well, every time a person, we said this, is saved, it's a miracle, and that's 100% true. But have we given up on God doing something miraculous through our church? The under the hood theme is the application of the core values to our church. Do we think that he can't do anything here anymore? We say that we want, man, I wish God would, but I wonder if God, like Paul looked at this individual and saw his faith, I wonder if God looks at our lives and sees our lack of faith. I don't know. But sometimes I wonder, do we really think that God can do anything? Do we really think that an active prayer ministry can usher in the miraculous, or is that just a formality? Is that just something that we started just for fun? Think about what we do as a church. Do we really think that God can use Ashland kids to reach into the community, engage them with the gospel, or does it always have to be some special program or attentive event that brings them in? Do we really think that God can use a student ministry to spread the gospel in Norwood and abroad, or should it just be activity planning and something to do with the Bible? Do we really think that God can use Ashland Loves to spread the gospel to those who need a little encouragement, or should we just hand them a sandwich because that's what we've been doing for, 3 years now? Ashland, I want you to hear me, and I'm going to say this right now. Please, if somebody, listen, okay, I'm almost done, believe it or not. If somebody's next to you right now snoozing, I want you to jab them right in the ribs because I don't want them to misunderstand. There's a lot of movement right now. I don't know how to take that. I want you to hear me. Otherwise, I want you to accept my resignation. You ready? Hear me. God still does the miraculous. But the opportunities are missed by Christians who believe that he doesn't do that anymore. I don't know how else to say it. I think that we have gotten comfortable. I think we have gotten a little bit lazy in our Christianity. I think that we have gotten a little consumeristic, as we've discussed, where we think that church is all about what I get out of it. And if I don't like the programs there, listen, I can go to one of 58 different churches within 10 miles of my house. Instead of believing that God can do the miraculous, we place the burden of responsibility on the church to do everything, and we have written God out of the equation. And if you believe that God can do the miraculous, he can do that through your church, but the church is comprised of individuals who have to be living on mission like Jesus did or like Paul and Barnabas did. Please hear this. Missional living believes God to do the miraculous. Do we really think that he can, or has he stopped? So now, verse 11 down to verse 18 is where we're going to land this plane. I want you to read this with me. Verse number 11, and when the people saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in the speech of the Lycaonians, the gods are come down to us in the likeness of men. Now, I'm going to give you the statement so that we can get right to the text and keep moving through. The last idea of living missionally is this. Living missionally adjusts the methods, but never the message. Ever, ever, ever. So in verse number 11, the people come together, they see what Paul is doing, and in their response to what they saw take place, they begin to worship Paul and Barnabas as if they were gods. Now, Paul and Barnabas would often go in the synagogues. We established that while they were there, they would use the Old Testament specifically to engage the Jews. They talked about what the Jewish people would understand. But when it came to this instance in verse number 11, where they are discussing Christ with people who are superstitious, who believed in false gods, who just witnessed the healing of a lame man, guess what? Their message was not going to change, but they're not going to say, all right, let's talk about the book of Leviticus now. This guy's walking up and down the road, never stepped a day in his life, and now he's jumping. Sit down now, nation of Israel. Let's talk about the book of Numbers. The strategy changes. They're not in the synagogue. They're not with the religious folks. They are in the streets performing miracles, drawing a crowd, and now that crowd in turn wants to worship Paul and Barnabas as if they're some type of God, and they've got to address the situation. They need to confront this immediately. So when Paul and Barnabas began to hear the ascriptions that were given to them, they were Jupiter, they were Mercurius, and not only were they renaming Paul and Barnabas, they began to bring him sacrifices. The newfound attention didn't excite them, but I want you to see what happens in verse 15. When they begin to see and to hear what's taking place, watch their response. Verse 15 says, and saying, sirs, why are you doing these things? And I put brackets around this because I remember preaching this. I don't remember the series or the sermon, nothing like that, but I remember making the statement that pastors and church leaders are just men. You want a text to prove it? Here's Paul and Barnabas' response. Stop bringing me sacrifices. Stop renaming me to identify me with some false Greek god. What does he say? Why are you doing this? We also are what? Say it with me. We're just men. Paul and Barnabas were human men that had no intrinsic miraculous power in and of themselves. We're just men. What are you doing bringing us sacrifices? Why are you giving us these nicknames? Why do you think it's all about us? Now keep reading. We are just men of like passions with you, and we preach unto you that you should turn from these vanities unto a living God, which made heaven and earth and sea and all the things that are therein, who in times past allowed or suffered all the nations to walk in their own ways. Nevertheless, he left not himself without witness, in that he did good and he gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. And with these sayings, scarce restrained they the people, that they had not done the sacrifices unto him. So let's get this, and we're going to wrap this up. In this engagement, they didn't start with the Old Testament. Their methodology changed. But listen, when Paul and Barnabas lived out their mission, the methods may have changed, but they always landed where they always landed, and it was pointing people to Christ. Every time. They knew what their mission was, and it was to not receive any glory or worship of their own. It was to deflect that back to the Son of God. And even then, even after they said, guys, what are you doing? What? No. You're literally bringing us sacrifices that we're preaching against. This makes no sense. Stop it. The Bible says this. The response to Paul's correction was that he could barely get them to stop even then. It didn't seem to really matter what he said. Some people may have stopped, but the Bible says, and scarcely. They really struggled to get these people to stop bringing these sacrifices. Well, living missionally often requires us to call an audible, if you're familiar with football terms. To change from the norm, to think outside of the box, not just for the sake of being different, but for the sake of the gospel. And I would remind you this morning as a church, it's a fatal phrase to say, we've never done it that way before. You ever think that? You ever say that? You ever go to lunch with a group of people and think, that's different. Having somebody do illusions in church, that's different. We've never done it that way before. So here's what I want to ask you, and I want to give you some answers. We're going to get really, really practical this morning. How do we adjust methods without adjusting the message of the gospel? That's our goal. We will never, that should be a core value, when it comes to evangelism, we will never stop pointing people to Christ. Ever. So how do we adjust methods without adjusting the message of the gospel? If you're willing to commit to this core value, here's a couple thoughts. You ready? This is not original with me. The North American Mission Board produced a list that looks just like this. So again, not taking this for credit, but listen, it's really well done. Here's how we can be on board with living missionally. Can I tell you first, number one, simply pray. Expressing our dependency upon God to move, if we are really going to make an impact on our community, it's going to require a prayerful support system. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, when we are in the chapel praying for what is going to take place this morning, it is the expression of our dependency upon God that if something's going to happen today, it's not going to be the primary communicator, whoever it is behind this pulpit. That's not it. That's not the answer. It's going to have to be a move of the Spirit of God on our church that then overflows into a move of the Spirit of God here in this city. The question is, do we care enough to see that to actually dedicate time to pray? If you want to see the message of the gospel go forward, here's a question. I'm going to give you a question with every one of these to make it extremely personal. Here's your question for prayer. Who can you start praying for today that needs to trust Christ? And you think, well, I've already been praying for them. Okay, let's rephrase the question. Who can you continue praying for that needs to trust Christ? Listen, if you want a heart for somebody and you're not praying for them, you're not going to get it. Praying for God to do something through you, through your church, to further the gospel. Pray. Here's one. Number 2, love. Be genuinely interested in the lives of others. Our effectiveness will be severely limited if we don't love the people we're trying to reach. You ready for the question? There's 2 on this one. Do you love the community of Norwood? We were talking about this week, one of the challenges of our church reaching into the city is we have people from all over the place this morning. You realize that? Northern Kentucky up to northern Cincinnati to the east side. We don't have a lot of people in Norwood that are residents here. It makes it difficult for a church. And I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the people that drive and are willing to serve. But my question is this. Regardless of the distance or the time that it takes you to get here on a Sunday or for an activity or an outreach, do we really love the people of Norwood, or do we like our church and we're willing to drive to the church, but reaching the city, that's really not a thing? Because again, we've said this, and I believe this to be true, that God specifically placed this church in this city on purpose. Because I'm sure that we are well aware that this city and surrounding cities, extending all the way into whatever neighborhood you call home, from this center point is an abundance of people that still need to hear about Christ, but it boils down to this issue of love. Am I here at church because of the relationships here? Or if I'm missionally thinking, do I love the individuals that God has placed us in the proximity of to love on them? Well, we have a ministry called Ashland Loves. That's good, right? We even used the word. Obviously we do. Well, do we? Do we really love them? So here's your questions. Do you love the community of Norwood? And do you see the community of Norwood as God sees them? Worthy of dying for. You want to live missionally, it's got to require love. Number 3, time is key. This is so hard, especially in a day where we have calendars, even on our phones, that are structuring our every move. You know, if I don't have a glimpse of my calendar tomorrow, I don't even know where I'm supposed to be at what time. And sometimes we become so regimented that if we have opportunity to talk to somebody, and if that conversation extends beyond that red bubble on my Google Calendar, number 1, I'm not paying attention to them. I'm already at the next stop. Does that make sense? Are we so regimented that if God gives us a chance to have an extended conversation with somebody, we're not willing to do it because we've got to get on to the next thing? I'm so busy, so regimented, so mapped out. So there's the question regarding time. Are you so mapped out each day that if God gave you an opportunity to use for an extended conversation, would it ruin your day? Now, we've all been in that situation where we come across somebody and we can't get them to stop, right? It's like, Eric, I love you, buddy, but I can't talk about the weather no more. I gotta go. I'm talking about, not that those conversations are not valuable, but if God gave you a chance to talk to somebody for an extended period of time that you know needed Christ, would that actually ruin your day? Because you're thinking, I'm going to miss this next appointment. I'm not going to get to the grocery. I'm not going to vacuum my car. This person dominated my day, as if that might be a bad thing. Number 4, discover where people gather. Find where people are already getting together and get there yourself and get involved. Build relationships. Whether in your community, whether in the city, that's one thing that we have strategically tried to do. If people are gathering together in front of the Norwood schools to pass out book bags full of school supplies, we're going to get there and be visible. If people are already going to be there, sometimes, this is wild, but sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can come alongside of people that are already reaching into the city, support them, build relationships, and God can use those relationships to open up to the gospel. So here's 2 questions. You ready? Where are people already gathering that you know of? And instead of waiting for the church to structure a program or an outreach, how can you get involved individually? Again, this is about intentional, missional living. I'm just giving you strategies on what that looks like. Number 5, here, we got to move. Do what you love with others. Now, I'm going to use this as an illustration for no particular reason, except it occurred this past week, and it makes sense. Do you realize this morning that God gave us the desire and the enjoyment of certain hobbies and things, and that wasn't by accident? Do you realize that? Do you realize that God can actually use your hobbies and the things that you enjoy to further the gospel? Denise, I think, wasn't it Denise that put together the basket thing Thursday night? And I've seen the final product. The ladies did a great job. Do you say build it? Do you build baskets? You craft them, whatever you do? I'm not going to ask, but I wonder if how many looked at that. Because if it were me, and somebody said, hey, guys, if Jay came and said, let's do a men's basket weaving class. Guys, how many of us, Tony's all on board. How many, don't raise your hand because you're missing the point, but how many of us guys like, yeah, man, let's go. I am willing to come and I almost said build a basket. It's not build a bear, build a basket. I'm going to make a basket. Let's do this thing. How many of us guys are, yeah, let's do it. Some of us thinking, if I'm going to go there, it's because I'm a deacon of this church and I'm probably expected to be there, but under my own free will, ain't no way I'm going to you guys were here forever too, take 3 hours and build baskets. Not happening. So here's the question. What things has God implanted in your DNA that you enjoy that you can connect with other people through? Do you realize that part of missional living is taking even the things that we enjoy? The idea that serving God has to be boring and mundane is dumb. Can you say that in church? I just said, it's dumb. I'm going to tell you this much. I believe with all of my heart that heaven is not going to be boring. I believe that God that gave us things in this life to provide joy can infinitely provide better in heaven. So why we think that we're going to leave all the joys of earth to go to the doldrums of heaven blows my mind. And if that's the way God works, then why is it that we can't take things that we enjoy and bring somebody alongside of us and say, hey, let's do this together? Think about the hobbies that you have. Think about the sports you're involved in. Think about the things that you enjoy doing. Because here's the question. Whether it's car shows, magic shows, if you like to stand behind a grill and really make good food, what do you love doing and how can you invite others in while doing it? What can you do? What has God given to you as a hobby or a special skill that you can say, you know what? We can come together on a Thursday night. We can work on this car together. We enjoy this. Time's going to blow by really quick. We're probably not even going to fix the thing, but we get to build relationship using that as the common ground. See, that's starting to change the lens by which we view how we use our time. If having a hobby isn't bad, which we've already established that, it's actually healthy for us, how can we use that intentionally? Ready? Number 6, ask good questions. Sometimes in a relationship, instead of fighting to get a word into a conversation, ask a great question. And then number 7, you ready? Listen. But I asked a really good question. Did you hear the answer? Well, no, I was already thinking about the next question. You missed the point. I ask a question with the intention to listen. So number 6, what are some open-ended questions you could memorize to ask others? Not saying, well, I ask everybody the same question, but we realize when we're talking to people, there are certain themes that everybody likes to talk about. Tell me about your family. Go back to that first list. It was on the screen at the beginning. Tell me about your family. Everybody, remember the days of pulling out your wallet and showing people the pictures of your grandkids? I know that's changed a little bit, but now we have these phones and they can store gazillions of pictures. How many of us say, oh, you want to see it? Here, let me show you this. Because people are interested in that. They like to tell you about their lives. So learn some questions. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your job. Tell me about the church you go to. What's your favorite food? Where you like to go? Tell me some stuff so we can begin the conversation that eventually will lead me to listening and eventually will lead me to sharing Christ with that individual. And again, as we say these things, it almost sounds like this is just a strategy. You're not really caring about the person. Go back to number 2. Yeah, you are. I'm asking great open-ended questions so that number 7, what would help you to become less distracted as you listen to others? That's the question, is it not? Because I don't know about you, but it seems like if somebody gives an answer a little bit longer than 30 seconds, I'm just going to say, sometimes I struggle. Is it just me? Sometimes, and if I do it, I apologize ahead of time. I don't know what it is about me. But if you give me an answer and it extends beyond my capacity in this simple brain, I've missed your whole answer. What are things that we can do that could help us increase that attention span and decrease distraction? I would imagine probably one of the most distracting things in this life, and I've told you this before, but now I've gotten to, and I've done this for several years now, I have a smartwatch. Every time it goes off, I can't. How many of you, if you have a notification on your phone, if you're an iPhone user, the little red bubble drives you wild? I can't have the little red bubbles. If it says I have a message, I got to get rid of that little red. I can't wear a watch. If that thing shakes, then my natural reaction is to do what motion? Do you know? Show me if you know. I got to do that. If I'm having lunch with Jay and that thing goes off, Jay, I'm sorry. I got to look. I think technology is probably one of the biggest distractions that keep us from listening to others. If I feel that buzz in my pocket that I know the notification went off on the phone, it might be ESPN, announcing a new score, but I got to look at it. And if I am having this posture in a conversation at lunch with Jay every 5 minutes, because it seems like these things are constantly going off, what am I communicating to Jay? What happens here is not as important as what happens here. And I'm not trying to correct our culture, nothing like that, but I'm telling you, one of the most distracting things that keep us from hearing other people are these dumb things. Not wrong, not intrinsically sinful, but man, it's not very conducive to me hearing what Jay is going through. Jay could be pouring out his heart. Man, I'm really struggling with this at work. This is happening, this health problem. And I'm saying, oh my gosh, did you see that? Did you see Kentucky lost by 29? Oh my gosh. Oh, what were you saying, Jay? I'm sorry. How crazy is that? Tell me I'm the only one, please. Because I don't know that I am. But I would be the first to admit I struggle with that. And on Sunday mornings, this thing, if you want to grab it at some point, I don't care. It's always right here. And my watch, it's right here. Because I don't want to be distracted in what takes place here. And some of you realize that on Sunday mornings, you can send me a text and that watch will go off while I'm right there, and I got to look at it. And it's distracting. And it's funny sometimes, but it's distracting extremely. So when you look at this, you ask good questions, find ways to remove distractions so that we can listen better. Jason, I'm going back to the platform. I know you're chasing me with that thing. Let me give you a couple more. Number 8, share your story. Every one of us in this room have a story. I'm really not comfortable with the Romans road. I'm really not comfortable with sharing Christ. Okay, share your story. How did you come to Christ? What were the conditions of you coming to Christ? Where were you? Who was talking to you? I'm not saying date and time. You may not remember that, but tell me about it. Every one of you have a story. How did that change your life? What has Christ done for you? Everybody has a story. And listen, every one of us in this room are interested in everybody else's story. Are we not? Why do you think Facebook and Instagram is so awesome? Because I get to know what's going on in everybody's life at all times. It used to be you picked up them stupid little magazines in the checkout line at Kroger. You know, those tabloids, I can't remember the names of them now, but those tabloids, mostly never true, but they always had that big attention-grabbing headline right on the front, right? Some snag or hook that's going to draw you in to buy that magazine, because when I get home, I got to know what's happening in that actor or actress's life. I got to know what they're talking about, because we are invested. And to be honest with you, we are created as relational beings. And we're interested in others' lives. It is why we read about them. It is why there's podcasts that are produced specifically telling us about crazy people in the past. There are Netflix specials that are available that you can watch hours upon hours about this person you've never met, I've never met, but man, now I'm bought in. I gotta finish the whole series. Here's the question. If God opened the opportunity for you to do so, could you share your story in some type of short way? Not, hey, you got an hour? No. In a concise way. This is what God has done in my life. Number 9 and number 10, you ready? Invite them into what we call here community. Resist the urge to limit your circle. There is nothing sinful, wrong, or any other word that we could use to describe it, to have close friends, but a community that is alive is meant to grow, and sometimes that includes inviting somebody new into it. Resist the urge to have that mentality of us four and no more. You ever hear that one? Throw parties, celebrate holidays, watch sports, create welcoming cultures. Because here's your question. When's the next time you plan on getting together with friends from church, and who could you invite into that community? Because the goal, number 10, is this. Listen, you can do 1 to 9, but if number 10 does not happen, I'm not sure we're at missional living just yet. Number 10 is share the gospel. Relationship building is the door to gospel sharing. Listen, it's not ministry if it's not about Christ. It's a hangout. It's a get-together. It's a free meal. Does that make sense? If it's not about Christ, be bold, because here's your question. Do you have friends where the other person would be surprised if you shared with them the gospel? Because here's the thing. This morning we have a chance, and if you came prepared, then we're going to talk about it at this moment, and we're going to be dismissed for the remainder of our day. But today was our day set aside to worship through giving to our Nehemiah offering. Now, if you didn't come prepared this morning, that's okay. Good news, if you have the app, you can still give there at a later time. We'll still be collecting for the offering over the next couple weeks. But if you're normally here, if you're an Ashland attender or a member, let me just remind you, our Nehemiah offering is the monies that we set aside and we give above and beyond our general funds for the buildings. I don't remember how long ago we started that project of working on this space, and now we're here. Those doors should be up. The cross is meant to be lit. Giving us some hard time. If you can read Japanese, that'd be really helpful, because that's the instruction book, what it's written in. So Jonathan's trying to figure out how to get that. So we got a couple little punch items, but overall, we have been able to do much work in this room because of the financial support of our Nehemiah funds. I don't know if you came in the gym this morning, but the gym is going to need some attention over the years. We've got water coming in the roof today because we've gotten a monsoon outside. Things age, things deteriorate. It just happens. Our Nehemiah fund supplies the money to be able to do those types of jobs. For this space, it was stuff, the stuff that you can't even see that took place up here or behind the scenes that we're so excited about. Listen. We have a new breaker panel that's not a fire hazard anymore. We learned about that not too long ago, that specific brand is a major issue. Those aren't the exciting things. It's not the new carpet, new paint that's exciting, but it needed to be done. And by the Nehemiah giving, the breaker panel is not only installed, but we can control the lights. This blows my mind, through light switches in this room. And we don't have to go to a breaker panel. To take it one step farther, if you're in this room and I'm at home, I can shut the lights off on you in here. And that's been fun. If I know somebody's in here, yeah, there you go. Oh, okay. Who's the smart guy? Yeah. Who's the joker? Jonathan's got his phone in his hand, so I know who did that. I know why he's doing it, because I did it to him. He was in this room, I was somewhere else, and I cut the lights on him. And he's like, all right, did you do this? And I didn't do that. What are you talking about? I didn't turn the lights on. And it has provided us opportunities already, to have that awesome Valentine's banquet fundraiser for our kids. We were able to hold that in here. It was such a great environment. We've already talked about this, but with Chase Williams, we were able to pack over 500 people in this space. And 37 of them trusted Christ. Why? Because of that. Because we believe in doing things with excellence that represent Christ well, even when it comes to our buildings. And so I'm going to ask you to do this. And again, just for a reminder, we always want to collect and then give back. And so 10% of what we collect through this offering, we're going to write a check and send it to Chase, who was just with us, to help continue developing his illusions. Because listen, He's in northeastern Ohio for the past 2 weeks. That church had over 200 visitors at their show. He's going to central Michigan. He'll be in Indianapolis after that. And this young man is being used of God. And when we see God's hand on somebody, we want to get on board with that. He's living missionally. We want to support that. And so we're going to take 10% of this offering. We're going to send him a check and to just encourage him. Used to develop, he's had some truck issues. He's had some camper issues. He broke down before he ever even got here. I don't know, that's twice we've had an evangelist in. They've both broken down coming here. I don't know what the deal is, but we had to send somebody up to get his camper to bring him here because he couldn't get his truck to run. So he's set money aside, and he can't develop his illusions and continue to increase his repertoire because he's concerned about that. We want to lighten that load. Because we had, I don't know, what did you say, Kara? How many visitors? I put you on the spot, I'm sorry. I have your Post-it note. How about that, since we're talking about? We had, 6 schools, over 1,200 invited, over 500 in attendance, 37 trusted Christ, 10 received assurance of their salvation, 3 have expressed interest in baptism, 13 individuals not ready to pray and trust Christ, but they heard the gospel. Can I tell you what does Chase have anything to do with this room? I'm telling you, this room and the flexibility of it allowed us to have kids sitting in the floor. We got to rearrange chairs. We brought chairs in from the chapel. It was super exciting, and I don't think God's done with that yet. And so we want to support him. Hey, listen, we're talking about living missionally, and we have to be blunt and just tell you that sometimes our intentional missions living as a church, it requires some financial commitment. It's uncomfortable, I understand, but it's also a time to worship. Again, you don't give to me, you're not giving to a church, you're giving to the Lord to see what he can do for the gospel. Do you know what our mission is here, by the way? Do you know what we have defined as our mission statement as a church? I hope you do. Love God, love people, serve the world. Our Nehemiah Fund allows us to do that locally. And I'm going to ask you this morning that you would join me in praying. And then as we talked about last week, the Bible says, so let him give. Thank you so much for joining us today. I trust our time together has been encouraging to you and your walk with the Lord. If you have any questions about the ministry of Ashland, would like to financially support the ministries here, or would just like to get into contact with us, please click on the Linktree link below. More importantly, if you have any questions concerning your eternity, we would love to connect with you, hear those questions, and answer them biblically. Again, we pray that our time together has been encouraging to you. And if it has, would you do one more thing for us? Would you be sure to click the like button, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this content across all your platforms so that our ministries can reach a broader audience. Know this, though, that we love you and we appreciate you being with us so much, and we hope to see you again real soon.